Okay, I'm going to teach you another thing about, in the second video you learn a different property of exponents. It's division with the same base. So if I have x to the 8, that means x times 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 x. On the bottom you have x times x times x. Now remember, in division, when I have a common factor on the numerator and denominator, those can be canceled. Those can cancel, those can cancel. So how many x's do I have left? I have 5, okay? So it's x to the 5th. You can obviously get that by subtracting. Now here's what I do in division when I have an x in numerator and denominator. Take the smaller x out and just subtract that power from the other side, and we have x to the 10th. Smaller x is out, minus it. So it's x to the 5 minus 2, which is 3. Take it out. Take your smaller one out. That's a rule we always follow, m to the 6th. Okay? Now, let's look at this. This first one's an easy one because it's only x's. So remember what we said. Minus 2, that would be x to the power of 14. Now, as these get, by the way, pause the video, go to number 1 on the assignment, and then we'll show you how to simplify the more complicated ones. Okay, now let's talk about the more complicated ones. If you see a fraction in multiplication, you want to extend that fraction through the entire problem. And then what you're going to do it in 2 steps, just like before. You're going to make 2 fraction lines. You didn't have to worry about that on the last assignment because there wasn't a fraction, but now you're going to start. Okay, look out on top, okay? Ignore the powers. You have a 5 and a 7, 5 times a 7, and then an x times an x times a y. Now look on bottom, you just have an x, okay? Ignore the powers for a second. Now 5 is to the first, okay? But it's in parentheses, so we got to take 1 times 2. That's 2. 7's to the first, not in the parentheses, so I just bring the 1 down. Now x on top, it's to the third, but I need to raise it to the second. 3 times 2 would be 6. Then the y is to the fourth on top. 4 times 2 is 8. Now let's go to the bottom now. X, you just have this 4, it's not in the parentheses, so it'll be to the 4. Now, before we evaluate, do you have any common factors on top as you do on bottom? You have a 5 on top, no 5 on bottom though. 7, no 7. Oh, there's an x, so I get rid of the smaller one and then subtract that from the larger one. So 6 minus 4 is going to be 2. Then y to the 8th. So now the bottom's done. I won't have a bottom. I can evaluate 5 to the second. 5 times 5 is 25. 7 to the first is 7. X to the second can't be evaluated. And the y to the 8th cannot be evaluated. Okay. Now remember, we want to take 25 times 7. 25 multiplied by 7 would give you 175. And that's your answer. Okay. 175 times x to the second times y to the 8th. Okay, next, you have a fraction. Look on top, you got 8xy. These are powers. That's a 2, by the way. Now let's go to the bottom. We have a 5, an x, and a y. Okay, so let's talk about our 8. To the first, but it's in a parentheses, so we got to go 2 times 1. That's going to be 2. Now this x on top, 3. 3 times 2 is 6. And then the y on top, 2 times 2 is 4. Now let's look on the bottom. You have a 5 to the first, but that's in the parentheses still, so we got to take the 2 times 1, and that's 2. X to the first, you got to take the 2 times a 1, that's 2. Y, 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, now before you evaluate, check for common factors. 8 has no common factor, neither. X, we got an x on bottom, so I get rid of that, and then subtract, and that's 4, because that's how you divide common bases with their exponents. y, okay, we would get rid of the smaller y and subtract it, and that would be 2. Okay, so now evaluate. 8 to the second, 64, okay. 5 to the second, it's 25, but remember that's in the denominator, so we put it on bottom. And the x and the y, x to the fourth, y to the second. Now, you're not going to multiply these. You're like, well, would I divide them? Well, unless it divides evenly and not have a decimal, just don't divide them. Just leave it as a fraction, okay? That's how I want that, okay? So if you have division between, if it's a decimal, you need to just leave it as a fraction. Okay, now if you have two different fractions in multiplication, you can just extend the line, okay? Now you have a top and a bottom side. So on top, you got 6, x, and y. Now on bottom, you have a 7, a y, and a 2. So 7 times 2 times y. So 6 is to the first, but it's in a parentheses, so you got to distribute 4 to 1, and that's 6 to the fourth. Now the x, I got a 1, okay? 1 times 4 is 4. The y, 3 times 3 is 9. Let's go to the 7s. It's 7 to the first, kind of a tight fit. Put a 1, but you got to take 1 times 4 because that's in the parentheses, so it's 7 to the fourth. 2 times 1, 1 times 3 is 3. And then with the y's, 1 times 4 is 4, okay? Now, before we jump over here, check out, see if you have any common factors. You got a 6, but you don't have it on bottom. You have an x, but you don't have it on bottom. You got a y, you have it on bottom, so we take out the smaller one and just subtract it from the larger. That's 5, okay? All right, now simplify what you can. We have a lot of exponents here. 6 to the fourth, I can simplify that. 1,296, that's on the top. X to the fourth wouldn't be able to be simplified, and neither would y to the fifth, because I don't know what those variables are, so I leave them. 7 to the fourth would be 7 times 7 times 7 times 7, it'd be 2,401. Then 2 to the third I can evaluate 2. It'd be 8. Now, we're going to want to multiply these two, okay? 2,401 times 8. I got 19,208, okay? Okay, now divide these top by bottom. See if it's a decimal, just leave it in fraction form, okay? That's a decimal, so that's my answer. I could make you reduce a fraction, but that would be very annoying. Okay, next problem. Ignore the powers. So on top you got 6. There are two 6's, but we're just going to write one of them. On bottom you have a 6. Okay, now the 6's on top, we add the powers together. 3 plus 2 gives you 5. Okay, and the 6 on bottom, you just have a 3. Now, do I have common bases? Yes, I do. So I take out the smaller one and subtract it from the top. 6 minus 3 is 2. And I can evaluate 6 to the second. That would be 36. So if you have the same base on top or the same base on bottom and it's there twice, you're going to add them together, okay? So it'd be 6 to the fifth, 6 to the third, 3 goes away, okay? Just like that. Okay, now extend the line. So look at the top. You have a 7 and a 4 as your number bases. You have 2 x's and a y, so I put times x times y, okay? So if we're talking about just the top, you got 1, but you got to take 1 times 3, that's 3. 4 is 1, but you got to take 1 times 2, that's 2. Now the x's, you see 2 of them, that's because you're going to add them together. Because 1 times 3 is 3, and 3 times 2 is 6, so that's x to the 9th power. Then the y, 1 times 2 is 2. Now that's the top. What do we have on bottom? Well, we have a y and an x. Okay, there's no numbers, just x times y, or y times x, doesn't matter. So x is to the 1, but the parentheses surrounds that x, so you got to take the 1 times the 2. That's 2. The y, parentheses surrounds it. 1 times the 3 is 3. Okay? Now, you have a 7 on top. Do you have it on bottom? Nope. 4 on top, no 4 on bottom. X on top, x on bottom. We eliminate the smaller one and then subtract. 9 minus 2 is 7. So it's x to the 7th power. Now, you have y on top. You also have y on bottom. Remember what we said. Get rid of the smaller power, which is there, and you subtract. So 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay? That's a 1. So we have 7 to the 3rd, 343, that's on top. 4 to the 2nd, that's also on top. X to the 7th can't be evaluated. And then you have y to the 1st. Okay? One thing, if you have a letter to the 1st power, you would just put the letter. Okay? Just y. Oh, I want to multiply these. Okay, 343 times 16. 5,488. And that's as simplified as you can make it. Okay, next one. Look on top. You got a 6, an A, and a B. Okay, so 6, 1 times 4 is 4. 3 times 4 is 12, and then I put a 1 on the B. 1 times 4 is 4. Remember, you don't take 6 times 4. You put a 1, 1 times 4. Now, on bottom, if you ignore the exponent, you have an A, and that's just to the 5th. Now, we're not going to multiply because the parentheses is just on the top. It's not on the bottom, so we don't take 5 times 4. We just put a 5 there. Okay, so common bases. A and A, so I take the A away from in the smaller spot and then subtract it on the other one. So that's going to be a 7. So 6 to the 4th, that would be 6 times 6 times 6 times 6. That's 1,296. You can't evaluate A to the 7th, and you can't evaluate B to the 4th. Okay, remember 2 fractions, you make that line. And now look on top. Ignoring the powers, you have 8AA, but we just put the A down once on top. Okay, don't put it twice on one side. Okay, so A, 1 times 2 is 2. And then remember, there's 2 A's, so that means we have to add the powers. 4 times 2 is 8. And then 2 times 2 is 4, and 8 plus 4 is 12. Now, look on bottom. You have a B, okay? You have 2 of them, but remember, we have a way where we can add them together. So 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 plus 4 is 6. Okay, so 8 to the 2nd. By the way, you have an 8 on top, but you don't have anything you could cross out, okay? Because 8's not down bottom, neither's A. So 8 to the 2nd, 64, times A to the 12th, and then B to the 6th on the bottom. Okay, that's all I have to say on that. So if you stick with that plan, it'll work. Remember, with fractions, that's 1 fraction. Extend the line, okay. You should be okay then.